I was 7 years old when my parents erased me from their lives and left me standing with a backpack and no answers. My grandmother took me in and became my whole world. 12 years later, at her funeral, the same people who abandoned us returned, cold, confident, and hungry for her fortune. They thought this day would finally pay off. They were wrong. And when the lawyer opened the will, the room changed in a way none of us could undo. Before I tell you how that happened, and why the day of my grandmother's funeral changed everything I thought I knew about family, take a second to support this story, follow along and let me know where you're listening from. It helps these stories reach people who need them. My name is Aaron Hale, and the only reason I survived that day on the porch was Eleanor Hart, Grandma Ellie. She arrived just before sunset in her dented blue sedan, fury written across her face the moment she realized I was alone. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't lecture. She simply knelt in front of me, pulled me into her arms, and whispered, "You're coming home with me. No one ever leaves you again." And she kept that promise. Grandma Ellie lived on Maplecrest Lane, in a modest house with creaky floors, mismatched furniture, and a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. She didn't have money then. What she had was discipline, patience, and a stubborn refusal to let me feel unwanted. She turned abandonment into routine, school lunches, bedtime stories, early morning walks, and a steady voice that told me I mattered even when my parents acted like I didn't exist. For 12 years, she raised me alone. She attended every school event, even the boring ones. She sat through math competitions she didn't understand and science fairs that bored her senseless, just so I wouldn't scan the crowd looking for faces that would never appear. When other kids asked where my parents were, she taught me to answer without shame. "Some people run from responsibility," she'd say. "We don't." As I grew older, I learned pieces of the truth. Vikram and Nalini Lawrence, my parents, had left town, changed numbers, and started over. They never sent birthday cards. Never called. Never checked if I was alive. Grandma Ellie never spoke badly about them, but she never defended them either. Silence was her boundary. She worked quietly. Saved carefully. Invested slowly. I didn't know it then, but every decision she made carried weight far beyond our small life. She never dressed flashy, never bragged, never let money define her. But she understood power, the quiet kind. When I turned 19, she grew ill. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just enough to make time feel fragile. I stayed home more. Cooked for her. Took over chores. She watched me closely during those months, as if memorizing who I had become. One night, while we sat at the kitchen table, she placed her hand over mine and said, "Aaron, no matter what happens, remember this, love is proven by who stays." She passed away 6 months later. The morning of her funeral, St. Alder's Chapel was filled with people whose lives she had touched quietly. Neighbors. Old friends. People I barely recognized. I stood near the entrance greeting them, holding myself together with sheer will. Then I saw them. My parents. They stood across the courtyard as if they belonged there. Vikram in a tailored black suit. Nalini with flawless makeup and eyes already scanning the room. They didn't look at me with guilt. They looked at me like an obstacle. I turned away. During the service, they sat stiff and silent. No tears. No bowed heads. Just patience, the kind people have when they're waiting for paperwork. After the burial, Daniel Crow, my grandmother's attorney, asked me to come to his office that evening. He said it was Eleanor's request that the will be read immediately. When I arrived at Crow and Whitman legal chambers, my parents were already seated. Vikram smiled like a man who believed the ending favored him. Nalini crossed her arms and said, "Let's make this quick." They thought they were about to reclaim something that was never theirs. They were wrong. And they were about to learn just how carefully Eleanor Hart had prepared for this moment. Daniel Crow closed the door behind him with a soft click, the kind that sounds harmless until you realize it seals a room shut. He placed a leather folder on the table and adjusted his glasses, taking a moment to look at each of us. When his eyes met mine, there was something steady there, something reassuring. When he looked at my parents, his expression hardened into professional neutrality. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I need to confirm that everyone understands why we're here. This reading is not optional." Eleanor Hart was very specific. Vikram leaned back in his chair. "We understand perfectly. Let's not drag this out." Nalini nodded, her lips curling slightly. "We've had a long day." I said nothing. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, nails biting into my palms. I wasn't here for speed. I was here for truth. Daniel opened the folder slowly, deliberately. The sound of paper sliding against paper filled the room. My parents exchanged a look, a silent signal that told me they believed this was a formality. A speed bump before the money moved where it belonged. "To begin," Daniel said, "I want to make something clear. Eleanor Hart updated her will multiple times over the past 10 years. Each version was notarized, witnessed, and legally fortified. She anticipated challenges. Vikram scoffed. She was old. Emotional. Influenced. Daniel didn't blink. She was precise. He began reading introductory language, legal phrasing, clauses, acknowledgments. Nalini's fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of her chair. Vikram checked his watch. Then Daniel paused. To my grandson, Aaron Hale, he read, the boy who was left behind but never abandoned in spirit. I felt my throat tighten. Daniel continued, his voice steady. You were 7 years old when responsibility was discarded by those who should have protected you. From that day forward, you became my purpose. Nalini shifted uncomfortably. Vikram cleared his throat. This isn't necessary. Daniel looked up. It is. He turned another page. For 12 years, I watched Aaron grow into a man of integrity, resilience, and quiet strength. I watched him choose kindness where bitterness would have been easier. I watched him stay. The room felt smaller. I leave to Aaron Hale my home on Maplecrest Lane, all personal assets, holdings, investments, trusts, and controlling interests, totaling $75 million. The words landed like a physical force. Nalini's breath caught. Vikram sat upright, eyes sharp. Daniel didn't stop. To Vikram Lawrence and Nalini Lawrence, he continued, I leave $1 each. Silence exploded. Vikram slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. Nalini stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She had no right. Daniel raised a hand. Sit down. Vikram laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You think this holds? We're her blood. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. Blood did not raise Aaron. Eleanor did. Nalini pointed at me. He manipulated her. He poisoned her against us. I stood slowly, every muscle tight. You abandoned me. Vikram's face darkened. We made a choice. So did she, I replied. Daniel turned another page. There is more. That stopped them. Daniel read on. Eleanor Hart anticipated attempts to contest this will. Therefore, any challenge results in immediate forfeiture of even nominal inheritance, as well as the activation of clauses transferring additional assets into irrevocable charitable foundations. Nalini's confidence faltered. Vikram frowned. What clauses? Daniel closed the folder gently. Ones that make litigation very expensive. The room fell silent again. Daniel finally looked at me. Aaron, Eleanor left you a letter. She asked that you read it privately. But she also asked that one final statement be read aloud. He opened a sealed envelope. Some parents believe they are entitled to their children's loyalty regardless of their actions. That belief is wrong. Love is proven by presence. I chose Aaron not because he is my blood, but because he showed me his heart. Nalini's face drained of color. Vikram looked smaller. Daniel placed the letter back into the envelope. This concludes the reading. Vikram stood abruptly. We will challenge this. Daniel nodded. You may try. Nalini's voice cracked. She wouldn't do this to us. I spoke quietly. She already did. They left without looking back. When the door closed, the silence felt different. Lighter. Heavier. Final. Daniel exhaled. She loved you deeply. I nodded, unable to speak. She planned everything, he added. Including this. That night, I went back to Maplecrest Lane alone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked room to room, touching familiar surfaces, feeling echoes of her presence everywhere. On the kitchen table lay a small wooden box I had never seen before. Inside was a single note. They will come back when they want something. Let this be the last time they ever take from you. I sat down and cried, not from loss alone, but from understanding. I didn't yet realize how hard my parents would fight. Or how desperate people become when entitlement is stripped away. That reckoning was only beginning. The first legal notice arrived 3 days later. It was slid under the front door of the house on Maplecrest Lane sometime before dawn, the envelope stiff and heavy, my name typed neatly across the front as if it were a business invitation instead of a threat. I stood barefoot on the cold wooden floor, staring at it longer than necessary, already knowing what it would say. Vikram never did anything quietly. I carried the envelope into the kitchen, set it on the table where Eleanor used to roll dough, and sat across from it as if it were another person waiting for my response. When I finally opened it, my hands were steady. That surprised me. The letter was formal, cold, and precise. A notice of intent to contest the will. Allegations of undue influence. Claims that Eleanor Hart had been manipulated, isolated, misled. My name appeared over and over, always paired with words like coercion, deception, exploitation. I exhaled slowly. They weren't grieving. They were retaliating. Daniel Crow called less than an hour later. I assumed it would come, he said. Are you all right? I think so, I replied. I just didn't expect them to move this fast. They're not acting out of emotion, Daniel said. They're acting out of panic. That was the first time I realized how deeply the will had shaken them. Daniel came by the house that afternoon. We sat in the living room where Eleanor used to read every evening, sunlight cutting across the rug in familiar patterns. He spread documents across the coffee table, methodical and calm. They're arguing that Eleanor wasn't mentally sound, he said. They'll try to paint you as a caretaker who crossed boundaries. I laughed once, short and sharp. I was her grandson. Exactly, Daniel replied. Which is why it won't hold. But it won't stop them from trying. I looked around the room. She knew they'd do this. Daniel nodded. She prepared for it. He handed me another folder. Inside were handwritten notes, dated entries, recorded statements. Eleanor had documented everything. Conversations. Visits. The years of silence from Vikram and Nalini. The single voicemail Nalini left when she found out Eleanor's health was failing. Call me. We should talk about arrangements, the transcript read. Arrangements. Not concern. I swallowed hard. They're going to drag this out, I said. Yes, Daniel agreed. Because they believe pressure will make you fold. He looked at me carefully. It won't, will it? I thought of the 7-year-old boy on the porch. Of nights waiting. Of birthdays without calls. Of Eleanor's quiet certainty. No, I said. It won't. That evening, my phone buzzed for the first time in over a decade with a number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. Nalini. I let it ring. It rang again. Then again. A message followed. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. 2 hours later, Vikram showed up at the house. I saw his car from the window, expensive, polished, out of place on the quiet street. He didn't knock. He rang the bell like someone used to being answered. When I opened the door, he looked at me as if I were an obstacle rather than a son. You think you've won, he said. I didn't make this a contest, I replied. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, eyes scanning the house like inventory. This place is worth a fortune alone. I closed the door. You're trespassing. He laughed. You don't know how this works. Actually, I said, I do. His smile faded. That woman filled your head with nonsense. She raised me, I said. You didn't. He turned sharply. I gave you life. And then you left, I replied. Silence stretched between us. You wouldn't survive a drawn-out case, he said finally. The stress. The scrutiny. People will talk. I'm not afraid of the truth, I said. His jaw tightened. You should be. I met his gaze without flinching. You taught me what abandonment looks like. Eleanor taught me what strength looks like. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Then it hardened. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. In that time, the narrative shifted. Subtly at first. Then louder. Distant relatives called, some pretending concern, others outright accusing. Old family friends I barely remembered sent messages asking if the rumors were true. Vikram's version of events spread quickly, that Eleanor had been isolated, that I had taken advantage, that I had turned her against her own son. I didn't respond. Daniel advised silence. Let the documents speak, he said. So I focused on what Eleanor would have wanted. I met with accountants. Established the scholarship fund. Visited the shelters she supported. Staff members cried when they learned the donations would continue. Some hugged me like family. At night, though, doubt crept in. Not about the money. About the finality. There would be no reconciliation. No apology. No moment where Vikram or Nalini suddenly understood what they'd done. That realization hurt more than their threats. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in the living room, Eleanor's letter open in my hands. They will confuse cruelty with authority, she had written. Do not let their certainty shake yours. I folded the letter carefully. The courthouse was cold and echoing. Vikram arrived flanked by lawyers, confidence restored like armor. Nalini walked beside him, chin high, eyes scanning the room as if she were the wronged party. They didn't look at me. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Their lawyer spoke first, polished, persuasive, practiced. He painted Eleanor as frail. Me as opportunistic. He spoke of manipulation and dependency. Then Daniel stood. He spoke calmly. Clearly. He laid out timelines. Records. Eleanor's own words. Her planning. Her awareness. Her intent. Then he played an audio recording. Eleanor's voice filled the courtroom. I am not confused, she said. I am not afraid. And I know exactly who stood by me, and who did not. Nalini's face went rigid. Vikram stared straight ahead. The judge listened. Carefully. When it was over, the courtroom felt suspended in breath. The judge leaned forward. This court sees no evidence of undue influence. The will stands. Vikram stood abruptly. This is a mistake. The judge's gaze hardened. Sit down. Nalini whispered something urgently, but it was over. As they left, Vikram looked at me for the first time. Not with anger. With something closer to loss. But it was too late. Outside, Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. She protected you, he said. I nodded. She always did. That night, I returned to Maplecrest Lane and stood on the porch where my childhood had broken and healed. The house was quiet. But for the first time in my life, it felt completely mine. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the story still wasn't finished. Because when entitlement is finally denied, it doesn't disappear. It mutates. And what comes next would test everything Eleanor prepared me for. Winning in court did not bring peace. It brought silence first, and then something far worse. For 3 days after the ruling, nothing happened. No calls. No messages. No letters slipped under the door. The absence felt unnatural, like the pause before a storm. I knew Vikram too well to believe he would simply accept defeat. Men like him didn't stop when they lost. They changed tactics. On the 4th morning, my bank called. The woman on the line spoke carefully, the way people do when they know bad news might cause damage. Mr. Hale, we flagged several unusual inquiries regarding the estate accounts. No funds have been moved, but someone attempted to initiate a review claiming authority. I didn't need to ask who. They don't have authority, I said. We're aware, she replied. That's why we froze all external requests and contacted you. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the grain in the wood Eleanor had refinished herself years ago. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. Vikram couldn't stand that something had slipped beyond his reach, especially something he believed was owed to him. That afternoon, Daniel Crow called again. They're escalating, he said. We expected this. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're shifting from legal pressure to reputational pressure. He wasn't wrong. By evening, an article appeared online. Not from a major outlet, but from a business blog known for sensationalism. The headline was carefully worded, just vague enough to avoid outright defamation. Questions raised over elderly heiress's will, family claims manipulation. My name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't need to be. The article painted Eleanor as vulnerable. Me as opportunistic. It quoted sources close to the family who claimed I had isolated her, limited her contact, influenced her decisions. It was poison wrapped in polite language. I closed my laptop and leaned back, heart pounding. Anger rose, hot and sharp, but beneath it was something colder. Resolve. I drove to Daniel's office the next morning. They're testing boundaries, he said after reading the article. Seeing how far they can push before you react. What do I do? I asked. You don't panic, he replied. And you don't strike blindly. He slid a folder across the desk. Eleanor anticipated this too. Inside were letters. Statements. Affidavits from neighbors, doctors, clergy, even the hospice nurse. People Eleanor had quietly asked to document her mental clarity, her intentions, her relationships. She knew they would try to rewrite history, Daniel said. So she wrote it herself. That night, another surprise came. A knock at the door just after 9. I opened it to find Nalini standing on the porch alone. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just diminished. Her confidence, once polished and unbreakable, was cracked at the edges. I need to talk to you, she said. I didn't move aside. This isn't appropriate, I replied. Her eyes flicked past me into the house. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, I said. She sighed, irritation breaking through the facade. Vikram is furious. This is spiraling. You made it spiral, I said quietly. Her jaw tightened. We are your parents. No, I replied. You were my parents. Then you left. Silence stretched between us. She turned you against us, Nalini said finally. I shook my head. You did that yourselves. For a moment, her mask slipped. Something raw surfaced. Not regret, fear. If you walk away from this, she said, lowering her voice, you'll regret it. You don't know what he's capable of. I met her gaze steadily. Neither do you anymore. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. The next week was relentless. Anonymous tips sent to journalists. Distant relatives posting vague accusations online. Whispers spreading through social circles Eleanor once moved in. And then came the call that changed everything. Daniel rang late at night. Aaron, listen carefully. Vikram made a mistake. What kind of mistake? I asked. The kind driven by arrogance. He paused. He contacted one of Eleanor's former financial advisors. Offered money for testimony. My stomach dropped. That advisor recorded the conversation, Daniel continued. And then brought it to us. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I smiled. The hearing that followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies portray. No shouting. No sudden confessions. Just facts. Recordings played. Emails presented. Timelines established. Vikram sat stone-faced as his own voice echoed through the courtroom, offering payment for a narrative. The judge didn't need long. This court finds evidence of attempted interference, she said. Further actions of this nature will result in sanctions. Nalini stared straight ahead. Vikram didn't move. Outside, cameras waited. Questions flew. This time, the narrative flipped. Greed exposed. Manipulation attempted. Lines crossed. I said nothing. I didn't need to. That night, Maplecrest Lane was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the quiet of anticipation. It was the quiet of collapse. I stood in Eleanor's study, looking at the bookshelf she built with her own hands. On the top shelf sat a small box I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a single photograph. Me at 7. Standing on the porch. Eleanor beside me, hand on my shoulder. On the back, written in her careful script. They tried to break you once. They won't succeed again. I closed the box gently. Vikram's power had always come from certainty, the belief that he could bend outcomes by force, pressure, or money. That belief was gone now. And without it, he was just a man facing consequences. I didn't know what his final move would be. But I knew one thing. This story was nearing its end. And it would end exactly how Eleanor intended. The silence after the court's warning felt different than before. It wasn't tense. It wasn't waiting. It was hollow. Vikram didn't call again. Nalini didn't send messages. No lawyers reached out. No journalists lingered near Maplecrest Lane. For the first time since Eleanor's death, the noise truly stopped. That's when the damage revealed itself. I learned through Daniel that Vikram's business partners had begun distancing themselves. Quietly at first. Meetings postponed. Deals reconsidered. Then one major investor pulled out completely, citing concerns about ethics and governance. Others followed. Not because they suddenly cared about morality, but because instability is poison in their world. Vikram had built his life on certainty. On control. On the belief that nothing could touch him. Now everything was touching him. Nalini called 3 weeks later. Her voice was calmer. Not apologetic. Measured. Your father has been removed as managing partner, she said. I said nothing. They're conducting internal reviews, she continued. Accounts are frozen pending investigation. Still nothing from me. You got what you wanted, she said finally. I closed my eyes. No, I replied. I got what Eleanor wanted. She inhaled sharply. You think she loved you more than us? I thought of Eleanor's hands guiding mine as we planted tomatoes. Of her staying up late to help me with school projects. Of her standing between me and a world that didn't want the inconvenience of a child. She showed it, I said. Nalini didn't respond. When the call ended, I felt no satisfaction. Just clarity. Weeks passed. Autumn settled over the neighborhood. Leaves piled along the curb. The house felt warmer somehow, less burdened by the past. I began the work Eleanor had planned. The trust was finalized. Scholarships established. The community center renovation approved. The hospice wing funded quietly, without naming ceremonies or press releases. Eleanor had never wanted applause. She wanted continuity. One afternoon, while sorting documents in her study, I found another envelope tucked behind a row of books. It wasn't sealed. Just folded. Inside was a letter written shortly before her passing. If you are reading this, it means the storm has come and gone. You are standing where I hoped you would, still upright. I wish I could say this was all done out of love alone, but protection requires strength too. They will tell you I chose you over them. That is not true. I chose integrity over entitlement. If they had chosen you when you needed them, none of this would have been necessary. Lie freely now. Don't harden. Don't shrink. And never confuse silence with weakness. I sat there for a long time after reading it. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. I was leaving the courthouse after finalizing paperwork when I saw Vikram standing near the steps. He looked older. Smaller. Not broken, just exposed. He didn't approach immediately. Just watched. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual command. You didn't have to destroy everything. I stopped walking. You did that yourself, I replied. He scoffed weakly. She poisoned you against us. I turned to face him fully. You abandoned me. Then you tried to take from the woman who raised me. Don't rewrite this. His jaw clenched. You think you've won? I looked at him carefully. At the man who once filled rooms with authority and now struggled to fill silence. I think this isn't a game, I said. And it never was. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or loss. Then it vanished. You'll regret turning your back on blood, he muttered. I met his gaze without anger. Blood didn't stay. I walked away. That was the last time I saw him. Months later, Maplecrest Lane bloomed again in spring. I stood in the garden Eleanor loved, watching new growth push through soil she once tended. Life, stubborn and unbothered by human conflict, moved forward. So did I. The house became a place of gathering again. Students visited. Neighbors stopped by. Laughter returned to rooms that had once echoed with tension. And in quiet moments, when the past tried to whisper doubts, I remembered something Eleanor taught me early on. You don't owe loyalty to those who refused responsibility. You owe truth to yourself. I kept the photograph of us on the porch in my wallet. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that love, when chosen deliberately, outlasts everything else. Before you go, do me a small favor. If stories about quiet strength, hidden truths, and lives rebuilt resonate with you, support this channel by subscribing and sharing where you're watching from in the comments. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most, sometimes more than they realize.